Recording. All right. So, good morning and welcome everybody to our webinar this morning. My name is Jennifer Smith with the Wisconsin Out of School Time Alliance, a program of the Marshfield Clinic region of Sanford Health. We want to welcome you to today's webinar, Cultivating Connections, Enhancing Social Skills and Peer Relationships in Youth Programs. This webinar is part of a mental health series that we have ongoing through a partnership with sorry, I had a window just pop up with the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. Before we start, just a few logistics to remind everyone to keep their microphones on mute. If you have questions, please post them in the chat. Jill and I will be monitoring that throughout, and so we will kind of lift up questions as they come in. We will have a webinar next month in April, empowering after-school programs, navigating policies and procedures for addressing social determinants of health. So we ask you to keep an eye out for information regarding registering for that webinar. And with all the logistics aside, I am going to hand it over to our guest speaker today. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Jacob Diestelman.
It is a hard last name, so don't worry about it. So I will kind of dive in. As you can see, the cultivating connections, enhancing youth social skills and relationships in our various roles and programs that we're involved in. I just heard that from Jennifer that I need to call this the Marshfield region of Sanford Health. I haven't done a presentation where I've needed to do that yet. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'll change that later. But as you refer to this in the future, I wrote all that stuff down about who I am. I won't dwell on it. Email, phone number. Feel free to contact me to reach out for whatever. I do a lot of stuff here. This is one area that I have some exposure, did some research on, looked at some things, and hopefully can give you some good information today about. Similarly, I know that Jennifer just got done saying keep mute on, which is reasonable. But please, anyone can chime in terms of like typing something or wanting. I guess, I don't want to hear your dog barking because no one wants to hear that. But please, if you want to stop me, stop me. That's fine. This is not meant to be like I just want to talk for 40, 50 minutes straight. And I hopefully I can get through this. I tend to over prepare. We'll see. I don't know. So let's dive into it. I always got to write this. I got no financial any relevant interests. I always put like someday would it be cool if I'd be like, yes, I do get paid. Whatever, never gonna happen. Someday, but nope, nothing. Otherwise, I think you all saw some of the learning objectives, and you can look at those as I'm talking about. So what we'll go through today, kind of a very very general outline, is the effects of social isolation, particularly during adolescence, on brain structure and function. How limited social interaction and differential social skills can change the brain development and emotional changes, and then some ways to intervene or to counteract or to work with this, and basically to present the latest, or at least somewhat up to date, neuroscience and psychology, so you all can have some more insights into how we interact with those youth that we serve. Those learned objectives are going to be infused. I don't actually have those on a slide throughout, but if you get to the end and you're like, wait, we didn't address that, or wait, what did you mean about that? Again, please let me know, and we'll talk about that, of course. So the fundamental need for social connection. The idea that we are a social species, that we're social creatures, is kind of bedrock, foundational. I'm sure everyone kind of knows that, but sometimes because it's so common to all of us, maybe we underestimate or we forget how when that changes, whether it was the recent pandemic shifts or just what's been happening more societally, socially with social media, different ways that we connect in person or digitally. Being engaged developmentally, longitudinally, and personally is paramount to how we thrive as a human. And so, as it says, prolonged isolation or disruption in connectedness has potentially severe psychological consequences. Here it's like orphans, empty nesters, everyone who has shifts in their social connectedness have a potential increased risk for depression, sleep, other mood things. And social isolation has recently been characterized as an epidemic. And of course, like it says with COVID-19, there was reasons we had to do our remote learning and our social distancing for basic, let's not die and let's not get sick and those things, but it had this consequence. Whether it was from sleep, nutrition, uh, social connectedness, loneliness, or those increases with depression, um, anxiety, and those things across the lifespan. Again, from adults to adolescents to children, and we'll focus more, of course, on adolescents and youth today. Um, this slide and this slide are going to be hopefully as detailed as I get with brain stuff, but I think it's kind of cool to talk about. So I know enough, look more into it. I don't think anyone in this room is a neurosurgeon. If they are, let chime in. But um, when we are disconnected, when we have when we don't get, I guess we can also phrase it as disconnected or a change in a basic necessity of social interaction, which can be different by person. But the prefrontal cortex and amygdala, huge. Prefrontal cortex is all those things with our frontal lobe that goes into all the social decision making, all the impulse control, all of the ways then that the amygdala and then the second point, the hippocampus are connected with emotional regulation, with threat response, with basically how to be functionally in society with that social aspect. When we lose that in these developmental periods, or there's a change or a shift, or there's more threat, these areas are directly impacted. And then again, as it says, the hippocampus, it's impacted to a smaller degree, but what we see is reduced gray and white matter, connectivity between hippocampus, amygdala, and the prefrontal frontal lobe, and basically some delayed cortical maturation, and even potential. It's always tricky to say like, oh, it's too bad you missed it. But some of these critical and sensitive periods, particularly through young age, early childhood, middle school, adolescence, these are critical periods that when we don't have these basic sort of interactions and pro social interactions met, they can change our brain structure. And that last point, I can't even pronounce that word. It really goes down to the cellular level of how alterations in the development of the white and gray matter, particularly the white matter, the myelin sheath, those literal connections between neurons, between brain regions, which can cascade all the way to again that frontal lobe, temporal lobes, and thinking and memory processes. Um, this is how important being social, having connection, meaningful reciprocity impacts a brain and overall child and human development. So again, I don't think I'm going to go much deeper into this. Basically, for adolescents and youth, it's a very critical period for brain development. I think we all kind of are aware of that neurogenesis. And when we have a disruption, a change in that social, interactive, and reciprocity, these consequences can be significant. Um, and can last into adulthood sometimes. Now, again, we'll talk more about today the plasticity, what we can do to intervene, how it's not written in stone, but still important. And then, particularly, kind of to hammer home that point, it's the brain's synaptic pruning or connection making, and and honestly, what happens is the brain explodes essentially in connections during adolescence, and depending on interaction with the world and feedback, behavioral, psychological, neurological, the brain starts to prune, starts to kind of take things away that aren't used and add to the things that are used. And the social isolation can disrupt the process that helps with the decision making, and that helps with the emotional regulation, that helps with the threat response, essentially modulation and anxiety reduction. And what happens is that people can, teens and adolescents, can actually be more distressed, more, for lack of a better word, disturbed, because the right things aren't pruned, the wrong things are over reinforced, and it's almost, without using that word neurotic, but you have this like self reinforcing, because I didn't get socialized, because I don't have a positive feedback, I'm even worse at it. Oh my God. And it keeps going and going, kind of from this critical period. So, again, those are the two slides that I think will be the most neurologically based today. Otherwise, kind of zooming larger to the understanding loneliness, this epidemic, it's not just because of COVID. It certainly was exacerbated by COVID. I think it's important to point out that loneliness and social isolation, um, obviously public health, what maybe you'll be talking about a little next time, social determinants of health. It's all being taken quite seriously. And again, loneliness and social isolation can be used interchangeably. They often are, but they're not exactly the same. Um, People can be very social and feel lonely, and others can have very minimal social contacts and not really have a sense of being lonely. So again, it's important to kind of distinguish, wait, just because I'm in public doesn't mean I'm not lonely. And just because I have few connections doesn't mean I'm going to be lonely. And this last point, I actually kind of wanted to highlight it as I went through the material I was reviewing and looking at things. Um, Contrary to popular belief, younger generations report as high, whatever rates of loneliness than older adults. There's a lot to unpack in there. And the bottom line is we're used to maybe hearing as you get older, you get lonelier. There's reasons for that: age, deaths, social networks, other types of medical limiting factors. It doesn't mean that that's not true. It just means that sometimes we thought that younger people had some different resilience. But no, they might be as significant at times, or more so. And so, without having to be like one's worse and one's better, just to know that adolescence, youth, and then older age are two really critical periods. They're both significant. They both come with higher vulnerabilities and potential for risks and negative outcomes. Um, Obviously for some different reasons and processes, but they're both very critical. And then generally, right now, loneliness and social non-connectivity is kind of sweeping across all age groups, across at least the U.S., most Western cultures, those things, which we'll talk more about why and what we do about that. So couple more points to hammer home with youth specifically and loneliness crisis. As we talked about, the vulnerability that comes with adolescence and youth due to some biological factors, but then also when there's more disconnected, when there's more sense of being alone, there is more risk for physical, emotional, and cognitive development problems, particularly self-esteem, kind of that feedback, positive or negative, loop on how you relate to others. And then, of course, we'll talk a little bit more, but the withdrawal, and then the escape, and then the lack of confidence, the withdrawal, escape, that negative loop of I don't know what to do, I can't do this, I'm not going to connect. See, I'm bad at this. That kind of self fulfilling prophecy. Um, some recent studies have shown that high numbers of Gen Z and millennials feel lonely compared to their older generational counterparts. In the 70s compared to 50%. Gen Z and millennials compared to boomer cohort. Um, Baby boomers. Boomers can be pejorative now. It's not meant to be a boomer, baby boomer cohort. And then, 42% of high school students reported feelings of sadness, hopelessness in the last year. And of course, we'll talk about this throughout. Well, today's youth are certainly connected digitally. They often lack some real life social skills. Technology has, fundamentally changed communication norms, and there might be some gaps with what we do to bridge those. Is what we'll talk about the rest of the presentation today. So, social media specifically. Correlation, causation, but what we are seeing is um, as social media increases, research has shown young people having increased moderate to severe depression, anxiety. These things have correlated in tandem. Um, some alarming stats, 21% of youth with depressive symptoms say things like they use social media almost constantly. Um, and by 2021, that 21% jumped to 34%. Similarly, teens who use social media for more than 3 hours a day usually have some higher risks of anxiety and depression. Um, as we mentioned, the developmental vulnerability of this age group and time period, specifically the dopamine hit of likes, all the way to the shame of the comparison, even though that comparison is not an accurate real life comparison. It's the curated and sort of made up world of social media, influencers, peers, whatever it is. But the shame that nonetheless people feel by saying, I'm not like that. I'm different than that. I'm not the way I should be. And again, the pandemic, and really since, exacerbating what was already happening. Um, and then again, the resulting mental health struggles and general social skills deficit that we see. Um, I thought it was interesting. Um, I thought it was really interesting. Again, the meaningful, close relationships and good health, physical and mental health, even what that does for like early death, or again other types of wellness markers. And and what was fascinating was research can show that middle age. So when you're past your youth and teens, um, middle-aged adults were at greater risk for mortality when lonely or living alone compared to those who have someone in their life or have peers or roommates or partners or whatever it is. Like that makes sense. And it's like, oh, so it's not like just young and old people have this problem. It can be mediated when we're in our middle ages too, depending on how connected we are and what that means for our physical and psychological health. Um, and and again, just the teen specific aspects of loneliness and social deprivation and social skills challenges can lead to things all the way from stress, sleep problems, academic issues, and again the thing we talked about before with anxiety and depression. That often can feel cyclical, can be difficult to get out of, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Um, and so I did want to hammer home this point, which maybe some of you see, the vulnerability that comes from this age, whether it's middle school through high school. But then the protective impulse that can actually exacerbate the problem, meaning, okay, remove myself from what it's not working, which only makes more loneliness, which only creates more of those issues, which can reinforce the idea of stay disconnected or use different connections that aren't healthy compared to social media ones, compared to in-person real life ones. So to kind of notice the idea that people withdraw, particularly in youth, because of already issues with identity formation, general self-esteem, challenges with dealing that transition and those things, the idea of removing oneself is not inherently weird or problematic in the short term. If something hurts, don't do it. If it is bad, stop. I mean, that's a pretty standard impulse and drive. Oh, that hurts, stop doing it. However, when it comes to these more complex, interactive social things, it can be deteriorating over time. Wow, that didn't go well. I guess I shouldn't try. As opposed to, well, it didn't go well. Maybe I should keep learning and trying and getting back to it. And that's something that we have to really help people learn resilience, grit, and perseverance through. But the idea that people withdraw, avoid, become more disconnected as a response to threat, harm, and pain is normal. Now we got to see how that links back to these developmental periods, to general socialization and those things. So just to kind of highlight, that's all of us will do that. What do we do to foster that resilience, to foster that growth as opposed to that negative spiral? And so here we can kind of start breaking this cycle. I use teens and children and things kind of interchangeably throughout this, but think about who you serve and what groups you work with and kind of adapt, some of these things. Um, some of these seem obvious, but it's nice to see them written out. So, breaking this cycle. If there's a reason why the youth feel disconnected, feel less engaged, have a negative thing, response, reaction, let's just make sure that that negative thing is something that if we can change it, let's change. Let's actually disengage from that one. If it's abuse, that's an obvious one. If it's bullying, no kidding. If it's what we'll talk about in a little bit, social media that isn't helpful, it's okay to disengage from that. And then that's the difference, though, how to then shift back to something positive. Like all behavior change, it can't just be stopping, it has to be replacing. Um, so, guide here, it says teens, but again, youth, um, into how we can, whether it's obsessing over social slights, whether it's focusing on the failure, and we want to really help them prime to acceptance, to positivity, towards growth orientation. This is developmental. You probably wouldn't use that word, but this is expected. This is normal. This is what it means to be in middle school and high school, on a team, in a club, in a sport. And this is part of, it's not just about, oh my gosh, you're liked or you score a goal or the outcome, it's the process. And again, to both remove overtly harmful, negative, barriers, limits, boundaries, and then to really shift the experience to one of priming that this is what I go through. This is normal. We all, again, we can remember probably when we were in our teens and our youth, we thought we were the only one that has this problem, this thing, this whatever. And the vast majority, that's not true. It's something we all go through. It's still unique to us in that moment. But again, the universality, the aspects that this is developmentally normal, this is what we expect you to go through, and then to provide that shift in how to look at that, create new number three, new opportunities, for that social positive reinforcement. Um, Whether it's the reframing from number two, whether it's a lot of friends or a small amount of, whether it's just as it says, just a small reliable group of people who can reinforce that that person is well, is good, is valued, is important. That's all it takes. We know this, and it kind of highlights that number 4 point, whether it's peers or adults, where you all can be adults. Um, it just takes kind of a few connections to shift that. Again, we'd like peers, peer to peer, of course, because that's important. But even with peer to adult, peer to the mentor, peer towards that positive influential person. Again, that the adults can provide a relationship that is protective, has a buffer, and can model then what it means to have appropriate, effective social skills and interactions. So, none of this is like necessarily rocket science. It's just kind of seeing it written out, looking at it step by step, um, and then not, getting too, not that we can't get overwhelmed, but too like burdened by the idea of, oh my gosh, how do I TikTok and Discord and Facebook and all these. No, you kind of probably know a lot of this. Now it's just adapting it to those unique kind of contextual realities. So yes, as I say, the impact of social media, um, obviously smartphones and connectivity and all the correlates and impacts that has on the brain and youth vulnerability. And I'll talk about in a little bit. It's really how it's used, when and why it's used, as opposed to like all good and all bad. Kind of mentioned that in the learning objectives. And I've been pleasantly surprised. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but I'll share it now too. Um, Due to my life, my age, my social context, I don't do a lot of social media for all sorts of reasons. But I've been surprisingly happy with, now this is the 20-year-olds, but I think it could be there for teens and younger too. Places where it's like I'm alone. Oh, I actually have a group. Discord has been something that I don't use, but I've been blown away at how there's been some really meaningful ways for people to not be alone. Yes, it's digital. Yes, it's not face to face, but I'm like, whoa. And I've really helped some people, direct interventions with that skill building in those settings. And there's where we'll talk in a little bit. It can be a nice scaffold actually, because it's still a real interaction, but there's a little less vulnerability because it's not necessarily in your actual face. It's through a digital platform that you feel like you have a little more control over. You're not completely kind of at the whims of who's ever directly across from you. In real life, you can turn it off, turn it down, put pause on it, and that's nice to learn some of these skills and things. So, I can't say that that these things are all good or all bad. It's how they're used. Um, so, kind of from that last point, when we want to talk to young people, teens, I don't know if I heard a knocking at my door. I don't think so. Um, uh, about social media dependence. These are some steps. Again, none of this is necessarily strange for all of you, but in your roles and how you want to, it's the idea is that you are going to talk to somebody, whether directly or as a group, whether it's personal or professional. Okay. I think I'm hearing somebody else. That's what I'm hearing, and that's fine. Um, that we approach the topic and we listen, obviously. We pay attention developmentally and age appropriate, what these people are using, what their patterns are, and why. Boredom, lonely, nervous, distraction, filling time. Or wait, is it enhancing learning? Is it a way to connect otherwise people in places that the person couldn't do physically, but at least they can do digitally? Again, you're not going to tell a 10-year-old all the stuff I talked about with an amygdala, but you can tell people, again, specifically age developmentally and other things, why social media is not the same as another type of interaction, pros and cons, biologically, psychologically, without boring them about myelin sheaths and white matter. People, you guys all know this, youth, kids, teens, they all, when you tell them why and it gets them interested, they tend to listen better. And then, of course, um, some of the basic ones about now that we've talked, now that we know why you do this, now that you have a sense of what to do, what not to do, or how it's helpful and not helpful for you. Setting practical limits, whether it's in your professional setting, whether it's in your personal setting with the youth we work with and we're with. Um, Again, big ones about sleep, the screen time and the light, how it interferes with that kind of stuff, and then basically getting a nice, well-rounded way of social media, media generally can be beneficial, but most things moderation is what's key, and variability and diversity. We don't hyper focus, we don't overdo it, and then we use lots of things: digital, real life, peers, adults, scaffold, older, younger, so people can develop a well-rounded way of navigating and interacting in the world. Again, I doubt these things are crazy new to you, but seeing them written out, seeing a little, these do come from. That was one thing I didn't get to. All the stuff I'm presenting today is from evidence-based, is from researched, is from. I didn't just make this up. Um, I can get away with making some things up, but I didn't want to do that today. And these all come from some at least grounded in some sort of evidence base of this kind of can work in some ways, and it's not coming from someone's just opinion. Um, so, if someone really needs some ideas of what to be and how to be more social in real life, these sound like, again, pretty straightforward things, but giving these options out to people, talking to them, again, what you do in your roles. Wait a minute, we are volunteering. That's what we do in our group. He says part-time job, but it's more of like working in the community as opposed to observing and purely having a passive role. Here it says care for a pet, but I want to expand that. Thinking outside of yourself and caring for, contributing to, again, similar to volunteering, again, hobbies that can be specific to what your group is doing, whether you're an after school program or a social group or whatever it is. We have a shared thing. That's where we find our common connection, and then we expand from there. Um, how to be more social in real life. Again, these are kind of just starting blocks. So as I shift to the next portion, here it says social anxiety. But basically, anxiety is a catch-all for distress. Yes, specifically anxiety, of course. But think of that as more of just distress, uh, 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 developmentally, delayed, behind, insufficient skills, and then the repercussions of that, and how to then supplement and help so youth and teens can thrive. So again, this type of distress, any type of distress, can make basic interactions really hard. Um, well, social skills can come easy to some, it doesn't for other people. Again, social media, pandemic, other types of things have helped to hurt our youth as they've gone through their developmental stages in different times in their life. And so just like, wait a minute, once that distress is there, now we really got to deal with that and do some skill building. Because just like all of us, if I'm freaked out, good luck if I can do critical thinking. Good luck that I can read the room. Good luck for me to do any real problem solving. I'm just freaked out. And that's not a teen thing, a youth thing. That's all of us. And it's particularly difficult at those periods because of all the other things that are developing neurologically and cognitively that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So here's where we can be a real scaffold for them, identify, help them, and get them from point A to point B. Um, I mean, this is basic stuff, but you're like, wow, sometimes people can't talk. Like, they don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know how to talk to me. They don't know how to talk on the phone. Again, one, two, three, these are not rocket science, like I said before, but woof, the challenge. Starting conversation feels like stepping out onto a stage, feels like an exposure, feels like I just can't do this. Again, fear of judgment, again, that basic avoidance thing, particularly youth, teens, adolescents, do as a way to make themselves not hurt, as a way to avoid pain. So they're going to avoid this. They're not going to want to do it. I can tell you, I've worked with, my job tends to be late teens, early 20s at the youngest. Yes, I've had some ways where social media has been helpful. Oh my gosh, the amount of people that are like, I can't make a phone call. I'm like, how did you get here? I don't say that part out loud, but I'm like, how did this happen to you? How do you even navigate in the world? It is, I think, a differently challenging thing right now. Again, many people were social media savvy, but that's texting. That's not having to use my voice. And so, like, the simple strategy is you make it specific to your context. This is a silly exit. Cool jacket. Where'd you get it from? The idea is we're doing icebreakers. We're building confidence. We're helping people ease into initiating. Right. We have a hard time even getting into a social interaction. Wow. Let's remove the bigness of I'm going to screw up. I'm going to make an idiot of myself. It's going to go bad. And if we're here as a group doing whatever we're doing as a group, let's start with the simple. Let's just break the ice, get the ball rolling, and then really help people ease into it without overthinking and just getting some of that feedback, that real time. Oh, okay. I didn't explode. Oh my gosh, someone talked back to me. Wait, we got something accomplished. Whew. That's really most of that early battle. So again, here's an area where I see a lot of social deficit in this cohort, this late teens, 20s, and maybe even younger. Um, Social cues. It doesn't mean that social media has prevented us from like understanding. I'm not talking autism. It can be there, but I'm talking just like, oh yeah, we're used to interacting in a somewhat buffered way. All of a sudden now I'm more real time in the world social. And again, that anxiety spikes. And when that anxiety spikes, that distress, we don't read the room. We have to practice that. Everything from body language to facial expressions, they might be a little missed. And so the learning that we can go into this, you're not going to necessarily sit down with whatever group you're with and be like, today's topic is body language, but you can be a model. You can identify those who have unique problems and maybe give them a little extra scaffolding, help them figure out what's going on. No, here it says watch movies, discuss emotions behind interactions. You make that your own. We're in a certain group that watches movies for some reason. Wow, talk about that. Push pause. Go, what do you see? Again, it helps them. We're talking about things up there. That is still media, but less here. So I'm less anxious. Wow. Then they internalize that, they make it work for themselves. Unfortunately, I never know who's watching my presentation. So I can't get too specific, but maybe if we have some time here at the end, I want you to ask some questions and figure out how this might work in your setting. Um, and then, the outcome, recognizing cues becomes easier and easier. Again, we might forget, given our age, given kind of how we selected ourselves into the field we're in. Don't get me wrong, I volunteered for this. I was asked to present. It still makes me anxious. Okay. Still talking too fast. I'm still stayed up too late tonight, but on some level, I'm somewhat more of an extroverted person. I want to do this. I like helping. I'm not a dummy. I think I can be beneficial to some extent. Most of you all in your role with youth and teens probably are somewhat willing, extroverted, and we may have forgotten um, how we just learned these cues. We just got reinforced. Some people aren't good at that, let alone the anxiety, the socialization issues, the social media challenges that are currently happening. Some people just need to continually learn that. But that's the point. It gets easier. We probably don't even realize how easy it is for us to figure that out in a split second. Um, but it will get better for them. It will get better over time. Even if it's hard at the beginning, it won't be as hard if they see that follow through, if we provide some of these scaffolding around, again, starting conversations, reading the room, social cues. Again, it sounds real basic, assertive communication. You know, People are often passive, or again disengaged, or maybe passive aggressive, or they're nothing, nothing, nothing until they explode. We call that aggressive. Um, but it can be as simple as helping people identify what they're feeling, figuring out how having them articulate what they want, and then how to follow through with that. You guys probably have tons of resources on the literal steps for doing this, but to realize that is the gap where we're like, well, no one told me. Well, yeah, they're not assertive. Well, the friend goes, I didn't know because I can't read minds. That's true. Let's make sure we can have a aspect of how do we assertively say what we want and then listen to what others need so we can get this reciprocity going. And here the big one is role playing, practicing, um, and helping people get words to feelings, to identifying solutions, and then to finding common ground or middle ground to get something accomplished. Again, I'd love to hear maybe in a little bit, a couple of minutes from now, what you all encounter in your different roles and settings where this could be a beneficial strategy. Um, and then, of course, this happens. And we talk about difficulty starting conversation, the fear of getting a bad outcome, not reading the room right. But adolescents and teens and youth, they're constantly being rejected. That is reality. Not that I'm not rejected, but I have a different. I don't put myself in those spots as much. A, I don't want to, and B, it's kind of self-selected. These are times in their lives where it's like, ooh, that fear we were saying before does cause anxiety, but the fear isn't unfounded. This is really hard. Whether it's connecting with somebody, accomplishing something, just putting yourself out there. Kids get slammed all the time through no fault of these slammer. Sometimes there are bullies, but it happens. Um, and so again, reframing this as a way to grow, as a way to learn, as a way to get back up. And then, of course, that last idea of self compassion, as opposed to withdrawal, as opposed to denigration, as opposed to continually finding ways to compare yourself as being less than. This is part of the process. This is part of what it means to grow, to develop, to get these skills and to stay socially connected. Handling criticism and rejection. How This is a critical time for people. It happens. I need to be able to sit with this. I need to be able to move through this, as opposed to giving up, overreacting, or some other path that doesn't get us through this with growth and with staying socially engaged. Um, you know, Another one is how to join into groups. Listen, bridge, can contribute. I'm going a little quick watching time, but the idea is, if someone comes into your whatever you're doing, they're new, you watch and here's how we can help people learn. You don't have to know it all. You just have to kind of pay attention, bridge. Hey, here's how I can bring myself into this. And then hopefully, because of what you guys are doing, whether it's hobby related, whether it's some sort of social group that has a volunteer, whether it's whatever, you can then actually be involved and feel like I'm contributing. And this can help people with confidence and with feeling like they actually belong to the group. Um, and then, yeah, as I was saying earlier, and I wanted to make sure I had time for this, as people are distressed and anxious about being engaged socially, here's where actually the benefits of social media can be used. Like I said, wow, whatever reason some person doesn't have a lot of friends at school in these groups you guys are all part of, the social media, not that we're going to, okay, you five get to be here and then those two get to go sit in the corner and be on their phone. But what we're getting at is there are unique opportunities that social media brings to do some of this bridging, some of this growth in a slightly more controlled, safe-ish way. So again, it creates opportunities for companionship, closeness. When there are reasons to be isolated, next time there's a pandemic, social media doesn't have to be horrible. The idea that, wow, I'd like to be part of a group, but I live in central Wisconsin, and there's not a lot of groups of anything anywhere. Blah. Social media is a way to find some of those groups, so you're not alone. Like I said, it does give us some control if we use those earlier benchmarks of limits, boundaries, oversight, so we don't get into some tricky, difficult situation. This way, the person who's learning some skills and connectivity can say, "Oh, okay, I can turn it off. I can change groups. I can do other things." And then, like I said, not just groups overall, but particularly anybody who's feeling uniquely marginalized. And that happens for all people and teens, particularly as they're figuring out who they are. Um, they're not alone. They have people like them, and they can find those. And there's where I found a lot of real good benefit from, again, Discord. TikTok has been a surprisingly good thing I've seen for youth when they're learning about something. And we can think of all the gender identity, personal identity, social identity, ways to go, oh, I don't have to be alone. I can find some models. Again, I think in our roles is to then help prune away the ones that are dangerous, help provide some scaffolding for how to apply this in their real world, and then give them the courage and the support to kind of keep using it in a way that's helpful for them. Um, And so, not that we don't know this, but just to highlight again, if there's benefits to social media, there's also risks to social media. um, we all know these things, but just to kind of this is what we're balancing. And honestly, whether you're a parent, a direct teacher, more of a youth program involved person, these are the things we can watch. So if, you might not be able to see what their sleep is, but you're going, oh, they look tired. Wait, we should start talking about what's keeping them up. Social media. Wait a minute, um, there's been a shift in this person. Are they watching harmful, hateful, manipulative content? Again, social comparison, that's a no-brainer. And then, problematic use is when they're doing that as opposed to doing something in the world that would be beneficial real time. Actually, one of the things I like to highlight with problematic use of social media, I do this with my wife. Again, we're not youth, we're not teens, but if we're doing something together, watching something, doing something, and we're on our phones, is it enhancing what we're doing or detracting what we're doing? That secondary screening isn't always terrible if it's like, I want to find an answer to keep the conversation going. No, no, no. I'm not listening to you. And now I feel literally alone in a room with you. That's not okay. So, again, problematic use is interfering versus effective use as enhancing. So, again, just kind of keeping these thoughts in mind. Um, and then, again, a nice little hierarchy of if we're helping our youth and adolescents think about digital literacy, um, foundational safety. Wait, knowing that I can be manipulated on these platforms. What I get out of it can be healthy if I can watch those first two things. And then, of course, to use critical thinking of, is this helpful for me right now? Is this what I need in this moment, even though it might be later or it was once and now it's not? Um, this is a decent little hierarchy. Obviously, we can't critically think about something if we're not safe. Obviously, relationships are important. Um, and that might be something that comes first before we, again, go into more abstract thinking about how we use the media that we consume. So, this is the last slide. Through practice and patience, and with the support of you guys, these things change. Particularly in this critical, sensitive period, what we do see, and one of the reasons I probably miss working with more of a younger group. Yep, there's some horrible problems. There's some things that feel just incredibly unfair and that kids and youth can't control, and it can make your heart hurt. But what I also find is, here it says practice patience, support growth. I'm not pessimistic on my 50-year-olds, but yeah, when I see a 20-year-old, when I see a teen, they can change real fast. It's a cool thing. Yep, they're very vulnerable, but they're also incredibly flexible, malleable, and ready to do good things with the right support. And so, that's just kind of how we structure um, our expectations, how we can see practice to growth, and just kind of putting this all sort of in a timeline so we can be persistent, vigilant, and give ourselves some of that compassion because it does take time and we're not perfect either. So um, I got right to where I wanted to leave 10 minutes. If we only use 2 or 3 minutes, that's fine. But I tried to get through it all. I think I did. So, questions, thoughts, things, more follow up, whatever. Fire away.
So if you feel comfortable, you can unmute and ask any questions, or you can put them in the chat and we'll keep an eye on that. We also have a survey that I will launch in a moment that we very much would appreciate your feedback on this webinar, and it helps to inform topics and the ways that we deliver things now and in the future. So I will launch that in a moment, but I want to give some space for questions.
It is one of the presenting is always unique and it's a fun challenge at this point in my life. But like, I don't necessarily know who's going to sign up. We tend to, I talked with Jennifer, like, here's what we can have, but knowing
Mhm.
that it's not the same uniform audience, I was like, how can this be helpful without being like, oh, at the YMCA or the Boys and Girls, without being like, and then the other 2/3 of you are like, I don't care. So there's where if you have an example, a question, now you can talk about yourself because everyone else can tune out and then talk about themselves later. So if you have anything specific, I'd be more than happy to kick it around with you or talk about it.
So there's one question in the chat.
Hmm.
Do you have any resources that you can share to help us teach digital literacy and safety to teens?
Sure. I have those. So what I can do is, I think last time, similar, Jennifer,
Send
just
them to
forward them
me.
to you, and then you'll
Yep.
send them back out. So I'll get those together between today, tomorrow, before the end of the week, I'm sure. Today's Tuesday, but I have to be realistic with myself. And yeah, um, at least getting some of these guiding principles, ways to at least start to identify some stuff. Um, I think the challenge, this is around digital literacy and social media, but it's the same challenge that all of us have when we work with youth. We have a role and it's circumscribed. And of course, these things uh, don't stay defined in the home, in the school, in the community, in our groups. And so it's like we can talk about digital literacy or about how to navigate social media in our setting, but we don't go home with them. We can't control it at all places. So there's always that tension there, which I think is in this case just highlighted by social media. But to go, okay, these are the guidelines I can follow, and hopefully then it can help the home structure and the other settings as well. But yeah, I have at least some of those I can pass along.
Great. Any strategies to help students who
Hmm.
feel everything that happens is done to them on purpose, even if it isn't?
So this does speak, and I was fast enough and maybe whatever. This is part of that developmentally vulnerable stuff. The cliche is, obviously when people are young, they think that the world is either they're invincible or it's I'm the only one who's ever experienced this. It's all, it's that big back and forth and black and white thinking. And essentially, as their brain is developing, as their experiences are impacting their development, they're developing nuance. They're developing that cognitive flexibility, that largeness, whether we talk about it psychologically, cognitively, or social emotionally. And so again, happens to them on purpose. And here's where getting out of the bubble, really, getting out of the bubble, whether it's a social media bubble, whether it's their own bubble. Now it's challenging because if there really is, and this goes back to that kind of starting block, if this kid, youth person is is sort of objectively being harmed, abuse, neglect. Wow, well, let's make sure they get the resources. See, it can be different, right? But if it really isn't that level of, oh yeah, the world sucks because it's being made that way by my guardians, then it's about getting out of that bubble. It's about gaining that perspective, and there's where that intersection of digital and real life. Wow, online you only feel this, but in person you get a different experience. That helps with that cognitive growth, that cognitive complexity, and again, that does take a little time because there'll be one day, and you've all seen this, where it seems to sink in, and then whatever reason, they've lost it completely the next day. And there's where our patience comes in, the way we stay consistent and reinforce that. And that's part of that developmental, again, cognitive, hormonal, physiological, psychological piece comes in. But yes, that is one of those biases that we can start to internalize. Um, the world's out to get me and it's happening on purpose. And that's one of those things we want people to start to critically think, at least in a full perspective way. Because, yeah, most likely that's not true. And we don't want them to develop depression, anxiety, or more personality disordered things. Um, so then I don't want to have them in my office when they're 30. That would be the key. So you guys are doing a little bit of upstream work. The other question I got on there was, how about for teachers? Do you have tools or resources I can share with my programs? Thanks. Basically, I'll share everything that I brought up today, the best I can. That's a great question. It's kind of broad and like, what about teachers? So I don't want to like reinvent things you have. I don't want to assume you have everything. I'll just share and then we can kind of go from there.
Awesome. Any other questions from anyone? No question. Just want to say thank you. Thank you. I am going to quickly launch this poll. So if you would take a moment to respond to the questions that are in the poll, we would very much appreciate that. I will be sending out a follow-up email with the resources that are shared, with the link to the recording, which will be housed in our YouTube channel. So we will be sure to share all of the good things with all of you so that you can access those resources. Keep an eye out for future webinars and other learning opportunities that will be available to you. I will put our email in the chat box. If you need to get in touch with us or have questions for any reason, this is the easiest way to contact us. And with that, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a great week. Thank you for joining us. We'll hang
Yay,
out for
thank
another
Thank
you.
minute or
you.
two. If you have any other questions, thank you so much for presenting to us today.
Awesome.
Thank you. This was great. I really appreciate any conversation, but this was a very good one on this field. We still need to, talk about it. So thank you so much for holding
You're
the
welcome.
space for us to talk about it and learn more about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Priscilla.
Thank you guys for listening. I was
Yeah,
very
thank you.
intuitive, very intuitive.
Great.
So everyone have an awesome day so I can write those in my notes.
All right, I'm going to log off because I'm going to get some lunch for my next
Yes,
meeting. So
excellent.
thank you.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Okay, bye.
Bye.